Hello everybody, Justin from Playing Board Games here, and today I am continuing this series where I am checking out all of the revised core classes to kind of see what sort of shape they're going to be in the new current format. One thing I have to say right at the start of this video, just to, set the scene, at the time of recording, we do not know what the current format is going to look like. And I want to make content about current, so I want to do like something here. So that is kind of why this has taken shape. I've talked about this more in the Guardian video, which I've linked in the comments down below. But I wanted to know, I wanted to look at some current content because we know most likely, not 100%, nothing is 100%, so I'm not going to say anything like that, but that the revised core is going to continue into this new current format. So what I wanted to do is I wanted to look at this class by class to kind of look at the cards that were in there, talk about those cards, and kind of like what are these slots being filled well, what are those strengths, what are the weaknesses, and kind of like what could be a focus in current going forward for these classes. I'm not going to talk about the investigators because they're kind of their own thing, and Daisy Walker is actually very well supported in revised core, with some good cards to work with it. But we're going to look at all the other cards here, kind of just one by one, going through, discussing all of these, and some I'm going to talk about more than others, of course. But yeah, I think we just dive in and get this going. First up, we have Encyclopedia. This is a 2-cost, 2-experience item tome asset that takes up a hand slot. As an action, you can exhaust Encyclopedia, choose an investigator at your location. That investigator gets +2 to a skill of your choice until the end of the phase. Okay, before we get into actually talking about Encyclopedia, I think there's one thing that's pretty obvious, is that the hand slot for the Seeker class is very sorted. This has always been a very competitive slot for the Seeker class, all the way back from the original core set. There are a lot of now cards that can compete with this, and one thing that I hope that the designers still do is add competition to the hand slot, because the hand slots are, well, every slot does something in this game. The hand slot feels like the slot that you are actively using as your investigator, right? Your character puts on a bandolier. You don't feel like you're using a bandolier, but you're feeling what you're using in that hand slot that extra bandolier provides. There's a case too that like arcane slots also have this sort of thing, but like I think everyone just kind of feels, because we have hands, we can't all cast spells, but we can all hold a magnifying glass. And I think there's a really weird like tactile connection mentally that can happen when you're using cards in your hand slots. So I think that they should hope they keep exploring more that can happen here. That was a weird tangent for me to go on, but just bear with me. But yeah, the hand slots here for Seeker are very, very well sorted. We have the magnifying glasses, which are very, very strong cards. And we have Old Book of Lore, which is also not bad. Encyclopedia, however, is a very interesting card, because what Encyclopedia represented when the core set was first printed is something that I think kind of dissipated with Seeker as a whole for a while, but we've started to see inklings of it come back, which is the idea of the support Seeker, where the idea is that you can get clues and get things done, but you also can benefit other people. There was a very long time, especially as the card pool grew and grew, that Seekers would not use their support cards on other people because just statistically you won the game more if you were using it on yourself. One thing that I think the current design team is really good at is making it so that the Seeker cards have been like less egregious compared to the other cards. I know you all want me to say it, so I am going to say it. The Seeker card pool from revised core is in an incredible place, mostly riding the backs of magnifying glasses, Dr. Milan Christopher, Research Librarian, Cryptic Research, right? These are all very strong cards that mean no matter what, there is a good foundation for the Seeker cards. And I think that in the recent design, we have seen Seeker, while still get strong cards, because every class has gotten strong cards, Seeker has generally gotten cards that are less over the top, like how they were in the core set. I think this was just a very simple design thing where, because Seekers dictated the pace of the game, it was easier for their cards to just have a bigger impact, right? Because if you won the game quicker, that means that just those cards were just stronger, right? Like the cards that help you win more are just better, right? and getting clues was just the way you won the game. Fighting a monster was not dying, and Guardians obviously are very good at that, but like rogues, mystics, and survivors were kind of just doing what the Seekers and Guardians did, but worse in the core set. So that's why, like, I think obviously it's really nice to start this whole series with Guardian and Seeker, because I think they're the most straightforward ones. But I also think they're the classes that, as a whole, are going to need the least amount of support in bumping up what the core set gives in this current format. So with Encyclopedia, I think this is a card that will see play in higher player counts, even outside of Daisy Walker, because it's just like a pretty good effect. It doesn't require any secrets. It's just an action. In the core set, you do have Daisy, so you can take advantage of it more. But I think that this is a fine support Seeker card, and I honestly would love to see more support Seeker cards to kind of just expand on this, because I think it's a very cool part of the Seeker class. And I do have the prediction that if Seeker card, like if Seeker strength kind of just stays level with everyone else, we're going to see players are going to be more inclined to use their support cards on other investigators and not necessarily just themselves. Magnifying Glass 1, Magnifying Glass 0, one cost, takes up a hand slot fast. You get +1 book while investigating. Just do more, do better. And then 0, 1 experience, you can return it to your hand if there are no clues on your location, which might sound like nothing, but it actually can be very relevant at a time. We're not going to talk about why here, but it's just one of those things. These cards are a big reason why you know Seeker is going to be okay. They could release a 3-book Seeker in the next expansion. Where's our Seeker All 3s, by the way? I would really love one of those. I know we have our Seeker All 2s and she's busted, but I'm sure a Seeker All 3s would be fine, right? But in all seriousness, they could release a Seeker with 3-book in the next cycle in current, and Magnifying Glass would mean that Seeker is going to be okay, which is kind of crazy. And then also when you pair it with Dr. Malone Christopher. So this is why ultimately Seeker is going to be okay when it comes to the new current format, because they have just some really strong staples that they're able to use. I think what's very important is to give players reasons to not play Magnifying Glass without just choking it out power-wise, because I think that an example of this, let me just get this card here for you just so we can talk about this in here, is Grim Memoir as a really good hand slot item that gives you a reason to play it over Magnifying Glass. And I think that that's something that's very important to working with giving options for players to go beyond just Magnifying Glass. Because I love playing Magnifying Glass because it just makes my number better, right? It makes me more consistent. But I think as a whole, players are going to be wanting to do more interesting things with their hand slots. Again, going back to that weird tangents, because it feels like that's the thing you are doing. And just passively getting a boost while investigating is not really as exciting as reading from this cursed book that draws you cards if you succeed by 2, right? It just feels more exciting. And while still being, I think like Grim Memoir, while a very strong card, is less strong than Magnifying Glass, but still competable, and like it's still like competitive enough that you want to be actually like play Grim Memoir. Medical Texts, 2 cost, takes up the hand slot, item tome. As an action, choose an investigator location and test book 2. If you succeed, heal 1 damage to that investigator, and if you fail, deal 1 damage to that investigator. This is really slow healing, right? Like, this is not great healing. It's never really been something that you're, like, excited to play. It never really saw play when we were first starting out. Like, we would run it, but not, like, looking forward to running it, just because we kind of had to run a deck slot, and, like, Daisy Walker could use it, right? But one thing that I think is very interesting as a medical text card, and as a card here in this revised core for current, is the things that it can signal. And I think that there's can be, not necessarily that this thing is going to happen, but you can kind of look, imagine that the designers might look at what's in the revised core and use that for inspiration of what to do in the future. So like when I talked about this in the Guardian video, Guard Dog is a signifier that there is always going to be some access into the Thorns archetype in the Guardian class. Likewise, I think that the police badge is a signifier that there is this idea that Guardians can give other people or themselves extra actions, right? So what I think that medical text can possibly be a signifier for is that healing, well, that one, support Seeker is always on the table, but two, the healing damage supports, like healing damage support is always, there's always a pipeline back into that. We had Carolyn Fern and we had Vincent Lee, and they each did healing like as their thing. But what else could other shapes of healing support investigators take, right? And there's a lot of different directions that they can go because the design pool for this game is incredibly deep. So I think, while I don't think Medical Text is a good card, I think what Medical Text can do is it can show the players that there is an avenue for healing support. And if that is expanded on in one cycle, you might look at Medical Text differently because that card might change depending on the cards that come out in the cycle that's currently there. Next up, we got Old Book of Lore. 3 cost, takes up a hand slot. As an action, you can exhaust it. Choose an investigator at your location. That investigator searches the top 3 cards of his or her deck for a card and draws it. Shuffles the remaining cards into his or her deck. And then we have the level 3 version, which is very good. It's a 2 cost. It uses 2 secrets. As an action, you can exhaust it. Choose an investigator location. That investigator searches the top 3 cards of their deck for a card, draws it, and shuffles their deck. Then you may spend 1 secret to have that investigator immediately play that card, reducing its cost by 2. I'm going to just throw Enraptured on the screen for a second as an example of, so charges and or secrets, of how you can continue to support stuff that exists within the core set with new additions. This was added with the revised core, originally from Dream Eaters, that you can see right here. This card is a very nice addition to the Seeker class because I think, let's get a little bit like analytical here. Let's get lost in the weeds. Old Book of Lore for the longest time was just played by Daisy Walker, right? But I think we can all agree that Daisy Walker plays it best, but going a step further, I think that ultimately in the long term, Old Book of Lore 3 is a very good card that there could be reasons if you had a limited collection to just play. 1, it helps smooth out everybody's draw. It gives consistency across the table. 2, it allows players to save on actions and resources, which is a very good effect. While also, again, being that card selection that I mentioned in the first point. This means that these are cards that if they are just randomly supported in a recent cycle, you might look at them differently as a player, right? So if I just bought, like, let's say, I just started playing Arkham. I bought my revised core and I bought Drowned City because that was the cycle when I started. So now that's all I have. The current announcement comes out and I'm one of the people who don't freak out and have FOMO, and I say, cool, I'm going to buy the next box that comes out. They buy that next box and they look at everything they're having and they're Seeker and they're like, I want to do something interesting with my hand slots, right? So I'm going to look at Old Book of Lore 3 because it's the thing that's most appealing that I have here, and then that player might notice, maybe they're Daisy, maybe they're someone else, they can do this. I mean, this is very limited to just Daisy right now, but as an example, they might look at something like Enraptured, or someone they're playing with might look at Enraptured and say, hey, doesn't this place secrets on assets you control? And maybe that means that if I give this to you, like if I commit this to your investigation test and you get secrets, maybe then in turn, you can use your Old Book of Lore 3 on me, and then we can get some good tempo out of that. This is the kind of like small, subtle discoveries that players can make, and why I think that this format's going to be so interesting when things actually start, you can actually start seeing these connecting threads. So like, again, like how I said, Medical Text leaves on the table that there is always a need, there's always a chance that we can go back to healing. Old Book of Lore 3, to me, signifies, maybe there's always going to be a good reason to include some basic secret support in like our 3-set cycle that might come out here. So, just a cool thing to consider there. Go away, Enraptured 2. No one likes you. A lot of tomes, that's because of Daisy Walker, but also because of Research Librarian. But I think that the hand slots, as I said, are very well sorted. On to the accessory slot, which I also think is incredibly safe right now. Disc of Idzamna is the best card that you never play. It's a 3-cost, 2 experience item relic asset, takes up your accessory slot. As a reaction, when a non-elite enemy spawns your location, discard Disc of Idzamna. This just kills an enemy. You know how everyone is like they're so mad that like Seekers are currently eating the Guardian Pie? Like, yes, I know the Ravenous Mike and it has a combo that requires 3 different cards in play to do infinitely, yada, 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 right? But this has always been there. This has always been like Seekers thing. They can just discard enemies under crazy circumstances, right? And I think that this card in a limited collection is a really good way of showing that secret protection while also giving you the courage of the seeker to go off by yourself. Yes, it costs, I'm not here to talk about like the ins and outs, I don't want to get too deep in the sauce. Yes, it costs experience and all that, but I think what's important in terms of looking forward with this card is that seekers have weird enemy management. And this is actually something that Nicholas Corey said in his recent AMA, that they're always looking for every class to be able to do everything, but they just have to do it in a way that fits in their color pie. And if you look at the revised core, and the core that this originally came out in, this signified that seekers do have enemy management in their pie. It's just in a way that is a little bit more, requires more setup. You're more reactionary as opposed to being able to solve a problem when it shows up. I think this is a fine card. I don't think like you're going to go crazy about it, but if you have a limited collection and you don't really have anything in your accessory slot, this is a really nice option. One thing that Drowned City did bring, let me just, like Drowned City and Hemlock Vale brought good cards for the accessory slot here. That's, I spoke ass instead of accessory. But yeah, you can see like some good stuff here, and then also if we throw in Feast of Hemlock Vale, right? So I think that like the accessory slot is pretty easy to design and expand on, but I think as a whole, the accessory slot looks really good for the Seeker class. All right, on to the allies. Like the Guardians, I think that the allies in Seeker are good for a different reason. I think that B-Cob obviously is a very strong card, and Guard Dog is a very good card too. I think that the allies here are strong enough because these two allies have stood the test of time individually, and they actually still choke out a lot of Seeker allies. So I think the biggest thing, and I imagine, I can't speak for them, but I imagine the designers even look at sometimes Dr. Milan sometimes and just say, why are you the way that you are? Because they can't really, and this is actually a fun thing, right? You can look at some of the experienced allies in the Seeker class, right? Most notably, if we go to level 1 to 5, Gabriel Carrillo, a very well-designed Seeker ally, but you might notice he actually looks very familiar with Dr. Milan, which shows that, like, Dr. Milan, I think if he was released today, would probably also be one experience. But I think that what Dr. Milan represents in the current format, at least in this revised core, is a challenge, right? And that challenge is the Seeker allies, and how can they compete with Dr. Milan without outright choking him out. Like the same thing I said about Magnifying Glass, but I think to an even greater extent, because the other ally we have in the core set, which we'll talk about in a second, Research Librarian, is just like you're playing him to, and he's just gonna like be good. He's gonna be good in scenario 1 and scenario 8, right? And he's just like, there's not much that's competing with this guy. And I think that it's just one of those things that's just something to be aware of when it comes to where do we go next, is finding unique allies. Like, because they also brought in the O'Connell, which I think is also another interesting thing. I think the design is pretty nice, and there's a reason that you would want to play this, especially with actually even just the revised core. But it's a very tough line to walk, so I'm very curious to see, especially specifically how Seeker allies take shape. Research Librarian is a reaction after Research Librarian enters play. Search your hand for a tome, your deck for a tome asset and add it to your hand, and then shuffle your deck. We've often talked about on this channel how this guy, if he was made today, he would be different. Searching your whole deck for a tome asset is very powerful. A big reason for this is because Daisy Walker needed to find a tome to actually have an ability, so they wanted to give you just more options to find tomes. I think what's really important about Research Librarian, though, and why ultimately I think it's good in the rotating format that he does exist the way that he is that it allows a one of like a tome for like if they print like 1 tome, 2 copies, obviously in a cycle. They have just a way to dig it out with Research Librarian. So I think ultimately, while in Legacy, this guy is going to continue to be a problem. I actually think in current he's going to be very healthy, because even when this guy was just released in just revised core up to, say, Forgotten Age, right? I think he was still in an okay place. Like, he was obviously still very strong, but I think he was a very important piece to the puzzle in terms of Seekers having like some functionality that wasn't just their traditional play Dr. Maul and Christopher, get money, use higher education loop that came out with Dunwich. Like, now, I wouldn't mind to see this guy be tabooed to 9 or 12 cards, right? But I think ultimately, in current, I think he's probably going to be okay. Still very good, and I think an important piece to find all of these. All right, Hyper Awareness, 2 cost. Lightning Bolt, spend 1 resource, you get +1 book. Spend 1 resource, you get +1 foot. These are not great. So a big thing about these cards is that you didn't really have resources were a bit tighter. There was nothing really to spend resources on in that, like, in terms of like you play your cards, but like most of the cards in your deck were skills. I think this changes pretty quick once you get like a full other cycle to play with. And I think that ultimately, while these cards are good for like the core set, I think that for the current format, they're not going to do too much. All right, on to the events here. We got Barricade. This is a 0-cost insight tactic event. Attached to your location, non-elite enemies cannot move into attached location. Forced, when an investigator leaves attached location, discard Barricade. A very weird card, right? This card has always been weird, and I've seen it played a few times. I've played it a few times, and while it's always there's times where it shines, it's just like strange. I think that back in when it was first designed, they did a good job giving it all 3 symbols, right? Like these 3, well, not all 3, but these 3 symbols, because it kind of made it more open to, like, if you can't use it, you can find a test that you can use it on. And I think that's a very nice thing for Barricade and a big boon for it being functional. I think in the long term, for smaller collections, this is going to be a nice card to just have to round out your draw, right? Like, not in terms of the fact that, like, it gives you card draw, right? But if you're like, you just need a card for your deck that's playable, and like worst case is just an icon, you could do a lot worse than this. But then when it does work, it's going to be kind of sick. But I think that Barricade has a potential to be explored like the other ones. This could be an archetype that the designers could look at and be like, hey, maybe we should see if we can explore Barricade and do something cool with it. And I think that's really neat. Cryptic Research, 0 cost, 4 experience, fast, play during your turn. Choose an investigator location. That investigator draws 3 cards. Card draw, good. Card draw is always good. 4 experience is expensive, but when you have a smaller collection, this just means you're going to find all your other cards quicker, and it's very good card draw. I do like that how it supports the drawing for your teammates as well, and it goes back to my theory that maybe if Seeker power level doesn't get as high above the other, where it's like, Seeker, everyone else, right? If it's more like this, right? They're all kind of level. Players are going to be more inclined to use this on other people rather than just the Seeker being like, yeah, but I got to get this to get my higher education online to just get a billion clues as Rex Murphy, right? Mind over matter, fast, play during your turn. Until the end of the round, you may use your book in place of your fist or your foot. Again, I think this is a nice important card that also, like the Disc of Zamna, shows that Seekers can get it done in their weird way. Right? I've always wanted to explore more of a combat Seeker. The thing that I've always said about Vincent Lee is I wish he had 3 book and 4 fist. I think that would have been really cool to see. And I hope that this card counteracts that build. I do hope that there is some exploration for this. There's not much of it here in the core set. Like, there's really just Disc of Zamna, so it need to be heavily supported in this. But I think that as a whole, this is a nice piece for Seekers. We play this all the time back when we had a limited collection. Like, also, like, using it for your foot can be really cool. I think just, like, a big issue is that there's been this kind of weird evolution where a lot of Seekers have, like, good foot, and there's not really, like, it kind of just chokes out half of this card. So I'd like to see, like, I mean, you don't want another, like, 5-book Seeker with 1 or 2 foot. But, like, even just, like, turning 4s into, like, 2s into 4s can be really nice. Or, like, even just, like, having the fist be okay, but just turning your foot if you need to like, just, like, do some things. I think the new designers have done a really good job. I mean, I'll keep calling them the new designers, but they've actually been designing for a while. I've just realized that. It's just, I was like, time is fake. But the design team is doing a good job of making treacheries and like tests on locations matter more. So maybe mind over matter can also be explored in that way as well, because design, when you look at player cards, goes beyond just the expansion in terms of the investigator expansion, but you can also look at the campaign expansion as well. Seeking Answers was the other card that was added into the revised core set. 1 cost, 2 experience, investigate. If you succeed, discover 2 total clues from among your location and connecting locations. The 2 foot icons do a lot to show what Seekers kind of are secondary, which I think is really cool. I think Seeker kind of bounces between brain secondary and foot secondary, and I think that this, well, they don't have a double, they don't have a double brain one. I thought this was for a second, but it kind of shows that this is also something that, like, you might use this in a pinch to evade things, which I think is really cool. Investigate, yes, again, it just gets you clues. It just does the job. Likewise with Working a Hunch, fast, play only during your turn, discover 1 clue your location. Likewise with Deduction, this is just what Seekers do. They get clues, and that is what this core set is telling everybody. That's really what it comes down to. I think that this is a very solid set of cards. They have a really nice like foundation in terms of Magnifying Glass and Dr. Malone Christopher, and they have a lot that they can expand on from this with some killer card draw, a great skill for getting your tempo up, a great event for getting your tempo up, a fine event for getting your tempo up, right? But it's just a matter of, I think what's very important, and is just like not having the same sort of thing happen where we lose this support seeker fantasy that existed because their cards were just so strong, right? Like, there's always going to be a class that's the strongest in a cycle. That is inevitable. They can never make it perfectly flat. But I think what would be an important goal and hope is to not have everything just like be one class is like notably shoulders above the rest. So I think that while Seeker has a good foundation, I think what this really means is that they need less work in the cycles, right? Or whatever format further support takes for the player card pool, right? Instead, it could just be, how do we make them more interesting, right? That's kind of an interesting question that they could answer as the design team, rather than how to, like, with like Rogue, which we're going to talk about in the next video in this series, there's a lot of how do we make Rogue do something. With Seeker, it's like, how do we make them just more interesting from this good foundation? So I think that's a boon to the Seekers and something that we've actually seen. Again, if I'll just poke these up on the page for a second, Hemlock Vale and Drowned City, you'll notice that people weren't as like screaming about the cards that came out in the Seeker pack. They're more like, just like good, I mean, like the Precision Archetype's really cool, and they can continue to expand on archetypes through the cycles in the current format. But like most of the stuff here is like, there's some things I can do with this that are really neat and like good team support that I think is very cool to continue to expand on in the Seeker card pool. In the meantime, thanks for watching, everybody. I hope you enjoyed this video. We're going to be doing the Rogue one in a few weeks, so keep your eyes open to that. I know people are going to be excited for me to poo-poo on how Rogue is going to be, but again, I'm going to look at like what the designers can do and like what I see as possible avenues to take, and not be so hopeless about the Rogue class. I think they are going to need support. I think they are. They're going to be the class. Them and Mystic are going to need the class like support more than others. But I think there is still a lot that can be explored within the Rogue class. And as we learned from the Winifred Habamuk pack, they actually don't need a lot. They just need like 2 or 3 good cards, and because they also have lockpicks now in the core set and an upgraded Derringer. Like, they have a lot in the revised core that I think that overall they're going to be less hopeless than we think they are. So thanks for watching, everybody. Have a good one, and as always, a JJ's.